Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ashok Agrawal, the Vice President of Manufacturing at Geo Platforms Limited. Mr. Agrawal has played a vital role in establishing a large-scale electronic manufacturing supply chain in India for Geo devices. With a background in electronics engineering and over 3 decades of experience, he has been involved in setting up manufacturing operations and supply chains for technology-intensive product lines, particularly in telecom sector. Today, Mr. Agarwal will talk on building blocks for technology adoptions to scale up manufacturing. So without further delay, let's welcome Mr. Agarwal.
Thank you, OEM Magazine, and also Darshana and also my fellow colleagues for having me into this forum. So if you see, I think the topic of, building blocks for technology adoption is quite apt into today's environment. We see, as you all might be knowing, there are a lot of government policy initiatives to develop Make in India, the geopolitical challenges going on world over. I would say this would be the perfect recipe and the moment to scale up and to learn about new techniques and how do we scale up manufacturing into India. Just to set up the context here a little bit, I thought that let us first slightly define what scalability really means so that I can drive the context throughout the session. So as you all know, into simple terms, right, that the ability of a system to handle or process a growing amount of work. And if I have to put this on a graph, if you see on the x-axis, there will be some increasing volumes, demand of services. On the y-axis, there is a system capacity to improve the performance. So the key part is how do we focus while we are increasing our system demands, how we ensure that we don't lose our sight of performance. And that is where the play of technology comes into. So if you move on the next slide, that why it is important, I think everybody in the session is aware, and I think you might have your own experiences, that why scalability is required. And just to set up some context here again, you would have seen that the challenges of scalability are different for different industries. Like if you see in the EV adoption, we have Mr. Narang in this forum, and if you would see his challenges into how to scale up the EV adoption would be very different from the challenges which a semiconductor industry would face into enabling the semiconductor systems, again, for the automobile purposes or for the telecom purposes. Again, if you see the scalability for a goldsmith would have a very different meaning than the scalability which may be required for a blacksmith, the point which I'm trying to drive, but the fundamentals of scalability are same, that why they need it is primarily to be adaptable to the changing market demand and also the user choices, and to remain competitive and be relevant by optimizing the utilization of available resources. So the key word here is, how can we be flexible and at the same time be adaptable to the market changes? And here is where, again, the play of technology comes into picture, that how we can make the use of the best available technologies so that we remain flexible and at the same time adaptable and be agile while we develop our operations or our services towards scalability. Some of the fundamentals of how do we scale up into manufacturing further comes. There are different aspects of every business, like project management, then you have a shop floor of product manufacturing, equipments and processes, supply chain, people and competencies, and infrastructures and facilities. While this looks to be the independent or individual blocks, because organizations at most of the time, what I have seen into 3 decades, is driven by functional and in silos. But here is where, again, the technology comes into picture, and the key is how do we integrate these various functions into developing a seamless and a scalable supply chain. And if we look at it much more clearly, there are 2 layers of every operations. Like when I started, like somewhere my career, I think 3 decades earlier, we were all living into the physical world, means what was happening in the factories or our life. There was not too much of a digitization of our actions and assets. But the today's available technologies have very seamlessly are able to integrate our physical layer with the digital layer. So the key word which I have learned and I have seen over the period of time is the digitization of physical. You would have seen this into many instances, even into the service sector. Even when e-commerce came, right, people were talking digital, but now it is becoming more of digital. So it is more important into scalability that how do we digitize and connect our digital assets, whether we do program management, whether we do product and manufacturing, supply chain, people, competencies, and infrastructure together. The key word is how we consistently look into digitization of physical. And what is really more important here is that this is like a game. It is like a sport, right? Which we need to play and perfect every day. There is no single recipe that this is the way to start, but the theme behind every automation would be primarily that how do we move towards scalability, and keeping that in mind, it is very important that we need to have a connected ecosystem of our physical activities with the cyber activities. So what building blocks which I have seen over my 3 decades of experience is there are some fundamental blocks to this adoption of the technology, that how do we adopt it. On the side of the screen, you can see the sequence is not important, but definitely I've tried to put this into sequence, that every organization has some sort of strategy which is driven by their products, by their market, and their customers, and there may be some other variables as well. Based on that, there is certain amount of engineering which goes into it in terms of product engineering and or manufacturing engineering. Once they do that, this production or those activities needs to be conceptualized into a production environment. And it's important to note in the C block, I have put quality management as an integral part of a production management system, because this production management cannot be scaled up if the quality is not built into the system. And the bottom, you can see D, is the humble shop floor where all the real physical activities happens. So it is very important. I'll not go, you can see a plethora of some activities here, but if you see some of the underlying principles, see, I have started my career somewhere around 3 decades before, and I have started most of the activities from D, and I have seen that it is appropriate to more integrate the shop floor to the upper layers of management, like MES. This is I would say this is a platform which is known as the manufacturing execution systems, which integrates the physical assets and the movement of product, man, machine, material, processes together with us. Integrated with the design manufacturing, ERP, which people may have at their own, where they run their sales and operations, and a product lifecycle management. What the message I would like to give to my audience and my views is, to scale, it is very important to start. So unless until we start, there is no opportunity to scale. So without worrying too much about how do we integrate, it is very important to get into the starting and see from the fundamental point of view that how can we integrate all of these physical assets into the digital assets. Coming to the last point, I was just wondering that how do I better close this so that I can make some sense out of it. So I thought that let us put some determining technology adoption use cases, and that may help to see how to adopt the technology. So I have put some of the questions, right, which will be normal for every business. Businesses needs to ask themselves a question that whether how is the demand, because that is where the buck starts from, whether it's seasonal or dynamic. How is the supply chain located? Again, since I have some, I think if we again go to Mr. Narang about EVs, right? There's a new thing. There's a lot of dynamics in seasonality of demand, also the raw material supply chain. And even if we see from the point of view of the work which has been done by automation companies, I think we have also Mr. Surendra on the panel. So he will also have some of the ideas that how this type of challenges can be mitigated. Product life cycles are getting shorter and shorter. There are another aspects when it comes to new technologies like semiconductor, or somebody wants to make lithium ion battery cells, what is more gaining traction in today's, whether their manufacturing processes are more technology sensitive or capex sensitive, how is it that? And also there is a lot of a lot of discussion goes that electronic manufacturing, since I'm coming from electronic manufacturing background, so I thought to put it over here, because people say electronics manufacturing is not manufacturing, it is assembly. But that brings a lot of challenges because assembly of electronic components is in itself a manufacturing. The difference is that there is a plethora or myriads of components which are getting assembled together. So it becomes a mix of capex sensitive and people sensitive, right, processes. And you can keep on adding to the list. And so it is important that how do we knit this together with digitization of data, operations to be moved from low touch or no touch, like people talking a lot of robotics, IoTs, which makes machines almost no touch, manufacturing execution systems, which helps to develop a very smart connected lines. And now with the availability of 5G technologies and also much of the computer knowledge being available, digital twin, like people can see and experience and they can manage their operations both digitally and physically together. And this integrated with PLMs makes a perfect case. How do we move towards more and more scalability towards the things? And that brings to the end of the presentation from my side. If any questions we can take up later. So thank you again for being here and also listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for taking up this topic and discussing on building blocks for technology adoption to scale up manufacturing. I'd like to introduce Dr. Naga Hanumai.